How does a mother of three working for the Ministry of Justice secretly become a 20-year major aggressive manipulator towards her husband? And how does a professional predator convince a successful woman to marry him in just 5 weeks? Sheree Spencer and John Meehan, two different countries, two different lives, but the exact same clinical pathology. One used the mask of normalcy to hide behind a government desk. The other used a romantic mirage to hunt his next victim. The red flags were there all along, but they were designed to be invisible. We're going to look at the exact moment the mask slips, and more importantly, why the people closest to them couldn't look away. It's a domestic siege, a dismantling of a healthy relationship, a psychological weapon designed to break down a person's autonomy piece by piece by piece. And these two people were masters at it. As a licensed professional counselor, I have seen how the most dangerous predators use their professional status as the ultimate camouflage. When I look at these cases side by side, a government executive, program manager smiling while systematically destroying her partner's dignity, I don't see a typical conflict here. I see the professional mask slipping in real time. These people don't look like monsters. They actually look like successful official in the office next to yours, or the charismatic anesthesiologist that you would trust with your very life. This is a systematic psychological destruction of another person's autonomy. By the end of this clinical analysis, you'll know the 3 psychological red flags that even the most calculated predators can't hide. Skills that you can use to spot this type of status-shielded deception in your own world. Today, we're looking at 2 individuals, one from the recent headlines, Sheree Spencer, and one from a decade ago, John Meehan, to see how they use the exact same psychological blueprint to systematically, brick by brick, dismantling their partners' lives. In my years as a licensed professional counselor, I've observed the most effective predators are obsessed with impression management. From a clinical standpoint, this isn't just about looking good. It's about a deliberate tactical construction of a shield of respectability. It's this shield that they want people to respect them. That's their camouflage. These individuals aren't just creating a persona. They are creating a weaponized version of themselves that is designed to be beyond reproach. You would never suspect them. By presenting a flawless public image, they create a psychological barrier that makes it nearly impossible for others, including their victims, to believe that they're capable of such darkness. In psychology, the halo effect is a cognitive bias where our overall impression of a person influences how we feel or how we think about their character in specific areas. They meticulously curated them to ensure that any glitch in their behavior would be essentially filtered through the lens of their professional excellence. Take Sheree Spencer. Her role as a senior project manager in the Ministry of Justice wasn't just a career. It was her primary defense mechanism. In clinical terms, this is a masterclass in the use of social capital. When someone holds a position that represents justice or the law, they are essentially silencing their victim's intuition before they even speak. How could she possibly be a domestic abuser? Her husband wasn't facing a spouse. He was facing a figure of institutional authority. This creates a transactional power dynamic where the victim feels that they must earn the right to be with someone of such stature. As an LPC, I see how this leads to psychological enmeshment, where the victim's identity becomes entirely swallowed by the predator's professional shadow. You start to doubt your own sensory reality because the person hurting you is too important or too respected to be the villain. You convince yourself that you're just making it up. Maybe you're over-exaggerating this. And then we look at John Meehan. He took this clinical indicator to a predatory extreme by fabricating a medical background. He didn't just want to be successful. He wanted to be an anesthesiologist, a role that requires a literal life or death level of trust. By adopting the healer persona, he performed what I call the biological hijacking. Humans are neurologically wired to lower our defenses in the presence of caregivers and medical professionals. This is a survival mechanism. We must trust those who heal us. But when your brain classifies someone as a healer, your amygdala, the part of the brain that scans for threats, goes quiet. And Meehan used this as a biological loophole to bypass the natural red flag sensors that would have otherwise warned his victims. By pretending to have a medical knowledge, he could pathologize his partner's normal emotional responses. If she questioned him, she could frame her concerns as paranoia or even hormonal, using fake credentials to give his lies a veneer of synthetic and scientific truth. This isn't just lying. It's a calculated theft of a person's confidence in their own mind. When we weave these two cases together, the identical blueprint emerges, the construction of a status gap. If I tell someone, who will they believe? The successful executive, or the respected doctor, or little old me? They convince themselves that nobody would believe them. The predator understands this perfectly. They utilize their professional mask to engage in gaslighting by proxy. This is a sophisticated clinical tactic where the abuser uses the world's high opinion of them to make the victim feel like they are the one who is unstable or the difficult one. They use their colleagues, their reputation, and their important work as character witnesses to discredit the victim before the victim can even speak. It's a psychological trap where the predator uses your own respect for authority against you. This creates a state of hypervigilance where the victim is constantly scanning the environment for the next slip of the mask, while simultaneously being told by society that the person they fear is a pillar of the community. I want you to pause and think about your own circles for a moment. Have you ever felt like you couldn't speak up about a boss or a partner or a friend simply because they were too well respected or too successful to be a bad person? As a licensed professional counselor, I want to tell you that feeling of hesitation is not a lack of courage. It's the direct result of a predator's calculated impression management. That hesitation is exactly what they rely on to turn a relationship into a trap. By creating a world where they are beyond reproach, they ensure their victims remain in a prison of silence. Now let's look at how they turn that hesitation into a permanent trap. Once the professional mask is firmly in place and the victim is securely bonded, the predator moves from the grooming phase into what I call the systematic undermining. As a licensed professional counselor, I often see this transition described by survivors as a switch flipping. Suddenly, the person who made you feel like the center of the universe begins to make you feel like the source of all the problems. It's your fault. This shift is powered by what I call the intermittent reinforcement, a clinical term for a cycle where the abuser alternates between the extreme affection and cold, calculated withdrawal. This isn't just a bad mood. It's a tactical application of reward and punishment. From a neurological perspective, this creates a literal chemical addiction in the victim's brain. When the abuser is kind, the brain is flooded with dopamine. When they're cruel, that supply is cut off. The victim becomes like a gambler in a slot machine, staying hooked on the highs and desperately trying to figure out what they did to cause the lows, hoping that if they just try harder, the good version of the predator would return. And they're trapped. It's what I call the daily drip of criticism. In clinical practice, I observe that this is rarely one explosive event that ends the relationship. Instead, it's a slow, intentional erosion of the victim's self-worth. It's a steady leaking of poison into the victim's identity until they can no longer recognize themselves. We have a rare, chilling look at this clinical indicator in action. We don't just hear anger, we hear a language of total contempt. Spencer's caught calling her partner disgusting, worthless, and pathetic. In the world of clinical psychology, contempt is the most destructive emotion in a relationship. It's designed to dehumanize. By treating her partner as less than, she ensures that he feels too small to stand up to her, eventually becoming small enough to control entirely. For John Meehan, while we don't have the video footage of Meehan's private moments, the psychological reports and the victim testimonies reveal the exact linguistic blueprint. He specialized in intellectual bullying. He constantly told his victims that they were stupid, incompetent, or lucky he was there to fix their lives. He weaponized his fabricated medical status to make his victims feel cognitively inferior. This is a form of character assassination, where the predator slowly replaces the victim's self-image with a version that is broken and dependent. It's a universal script. It's haunting to see how a high-level government official and a career con artist use the same script of belittlement. Both predators identify their partner's deepest insecurities. They're really good at that. The very things that they were the most proud of or most afraid of, and they poked at them daily. This is a tactic used to ensure the victim stays in a state of hypervigilance. When you live with this daily drip, you're always walking on eggshells. Have you ever felt that way? Your nervous system is constantly scanning the predator's mood, the tone of their voice, or even the way they close a door, trying to avoid the next drip of cruelty. This constant state of alertness is exhausting, and it leads to a psychological fragmentation where the victim begins to split their own personality just to survive the day. One of the most common and most damaging questions that people ask is, well, why don't they just leave? It's a bad relationship. They know it. Why not just leave? But to answer this, we have to look at the brain's biology under the stress of a domestic siege. Your brain is flooded with chronic cortisol. It's a natural stress hormone. And while cortisol is helpful for short-term survival, living in it for months or even years can be devastating. Over time, this constant state of fight or flight actually exhausts the nervous system, leading to a freeze response. In this state of prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logic decision-making, long-term planning, and executing an exit strategy essentially goes offline. They can't think that way. They can only think about in the moment trying to survive. The brain redirects all energy to the amygdala, deep inside the brain, the primitive survival center. It's the emotional regulator, if you will. The victim isn't weak. Their brain is in a state of traumatic paralysis. They are living in what I call the cortisol cloud. that makes the outside world feel terrifying and unpredictable, while the predator's house, yet how painful it is, feels like the only safe place they know because they've learned how to navigate its dangers. It's what they know. It's part of their DNA by now. It's their patterns. As an LPC, I want you to understand that they aren't staying because they want to. They're staying because their nervous system has been systematically dismantled. The predator has successfully convinced them that they are incapable of surviving without their guidance. This is the ultimate goal of systematic undermining, to make the victim an accomplice in their own captivity by destroying the belief in their own agency. They want to take your autonomy and your agency and strip it bare to where you can only rely on them to fix it. And by the time the daily drip has done its work, the victim's internal compass is broken. They no longer trust their own feelings, their own memories, or even their own worth. They've been gaslit for so long into believing that the abuse is actually help or even tough love. Do you see how that's twisted? If you ever wondered why you felt paralyzed in a toxic situation, it wasn't a lack of willpower. It was your brain trying to keep you safe in an impossible environment. You were surviving a biological storm. Next, we're going to see the most dangerous phase of all, how they turn your own life and even your own secrets into a weapon against you. They're looking for leverage. In clinical terms, we call this information control, and it's one of the most insidious pillars of coercive control. These predators act as collectors. They spend the early love bombing stages of a relationship gathering data. To the victim, this feels like deep intimacy and being seen for the first time. In reality, though, the predator is not seeking to understand their partner. They're conducting a reconnaissance mission to weaponize the information later. By learning what you fear, what you're ashamed of, and who you love the most, the abuser builds a custom-made psychological cage. They're mapping out your pressure points so that when they transition into the devaluation phase, they know exactly where to strike to cause the maximum amount of paralysis with the minimum amount of visible effort. In the case of Sheree Spencer, we see this modern, brutal application of this clinical indicator. She didn't just use her words to hurt. She weaponized her partner's failures, real, exaggerated, or entirely perceived, to justify her dominance. This is what we call moral superiority scripting. By documenting and constantly reciting a list of the partner's supposed inadequacies, she created a narrative where the abuse was framed as a natural consequence of his behavior. By controlling the household environment, she was using her knowledge of his basic human needs to punish him. She knew what he valued: family connection, peace, and dignity. Those things that most of us value. And she systematically removed them, piece by piece. When a predator knows exactly what you need to feel human and then deliberately withholds it, they're practicing a form of deprivation torture. They use the very layout of your life as a weapon against you, turning your home from a sanctuary into a site of constant psychological warfare. Meehan was the master of the deep dive. He would dig into a partner's past, legal records, past relationships, or even financial struggles to find a shame point. He used it as a permanent tether. He made his victims feel that he was the only one who truly accepted their flawed past, while simultaneously reminding them that he was the only thing standing between them and total social ruin. Meehan's most effective clinical tactic, if you will, was the creation of us versus them narrative. This is a classic indicator of a cult-like isolation, applied to a romantic dyad. He would systematically poison the well of the victim support system, convincing them that their own children, friends, or even their lawyers were the real manipulators. He framed his control as protection, telling the victim, "Everyone is out to get you, and I'm the only one who truly has your back." By cutting off external perspectives, he ensured he was the only source of truth left in their lives. This leads to a state of cognitive solitude, where the victim loses the ability to reality check their own experiences. The clinical blueprint is identical. They were both collectors. One collected daily failures to justify verbal and physical assaults. The other collected deep-seated secrets to justify psychological isolation and financial exploitation. This is what I call the invisible fence. It's a calculated strategy of social and financial severance. In my practice, I see how this fence is built one brick at a time. It's a suggested change in bank accounts. It's a helpful critique of the best friend, or it's a protective stance against a family member. But by the time the victim realizes they are in the cage, the predator has already cut the lines to their support system. This is a calculated vulnerability, making the victim feel so isolated that the cost of leaving feels higher than the cost of staying. At this point, many people ask, why didn't they just see the red flags? Didn't they know what was going on? But as a therapist, I look at the camouflage. The predator makes the isolation feel like intimacy. They're really good at it. They make the control feel like support. They make the weaponization of your secrets feel like total acceptance. This is why it's so hard to spot it from the inside. The predator is using your own values, loyalty, love, and trust to build the fence. I've spent a lot of time helping survivors recognize that this isolation wasn't their fault, and it wasn't a mistake. It was a highly calculated clinical strategy designed to make you feel like you had nowhere else to go. It's a dismantling of the self, executed with surgical precision. But there's hope. Because once you understand the mechanics of the invisible fence, you can start to find the weak points. Next, we're going to look at the most dangerous moment in this entire cycle, the moment the professional mask finally slips and the exposure panic begins. As a licensed professional counselor, I've seen that the most volatile and high-risk moment in any cycle of coercive control occurs when the professional mask is finally shattered. In clinical terms, we call this a narcissistic injury. This isn't just someone being offended or having their feelings hurt. No, it's a profound existential threat to the abuser's false self. For individuals like Spencer or Meehan, their entire identity is built upon the external validation of their status and the total control they exert over their environment. When that carefully constructed image of professional excellence and moral goodness is challenged or exposed as fraud, it triggers an exposure panic. This is the state of psychological emergency for the predator. The brain perceives the loss of their mask as an ego death, leading to a rapid, desperate, and dangerous escalation in behavior as they scramble to reestablish dominance. The way these two individuals were eventually unmasked is a fascinating study in clinical irony. In both cases, the very tools used to facilitate control were the very ones that ultimately facilitated their exposure. For Sheree Spencer, she was unmasked by the very tools she likely relied on to maintain her domestic siege, surveillance. In a house where control was absolute, the nanny cam, a hidden lens, captured the victim mask slipping in real time. It provided the objective evidence that her social capital and high-ranking government status had previously suppressed. For John Meehan, his bubble burst when his victims' families began their own digital deep dive. They chased down his digital ghost, The trail of restraining orders, aliases, criminal records that he had worked on so hard to bury under his doctor persona. For Meehan, the unraveling of his lies was a direct hit to his primary source of power, his credibility. When the families began connecting the dots of his past, his psychological camouflage failed, and he was forced to confront the fact that his prey now saw him very clearly. The transition from mental domination to physical threat is often instantaneous. And I look at this as a desperate, primitive attempt to regain the dominance that was slipping away. When the invisible fence of psychological manipulation is breached, the predator resorts to the only tool that they have left: force. And in both cases, we see that when the psychological manipulation failed, the behavior turned physical or focused on total destruction. For Spencer, the recorded violence became the undeniable proof of the shift from verbal devaluation to physical battery. For Meehan, the escalation was even more extreme, culminating in a physical confrontation that turned deadly. This is the exposure panic in its rawest, most clinical form. If I cannot control you, I'll destroy you, or I'll destroy the life that you built away from me. This is not a crime of passion. It's a crime of reasserted power. I can't emphasize this enough to my clients and to you. The moment of unmasking and the subsequent attempt to leave is statistically the most dangerous time for a victim. In clinical practice, we call this the post-separation abuse or separation escalation. When a predator like Spencer or Meehan realizes their subject is no longer under their spell, when the fawn response stops and the victim begins to reassert their own reality, they often resort to a scorched earth tactics. They're interested in punishing the victim for the narcissistic injury that they've caused. This might involve weaponizing the legal system, like a litigation abuse, engaging in extreme stalking, or escalating to severe physical harm. The predator's need to win the breakup or avenge their exposure often outweighs their own self-preservation. They would rather burn their lives down than allow the victim to walk away with their dignity intact. From a neurological standpoint, the predator at this stage is operating almost entirely out of a dysregulated limbic system. Their higher order reasoning is gone, replaced by a desperate need to extinguish the threat of exposure at all costs. For the victim, this is a time of acute trauma, where the cortisol cloud that we discussed earlier is replaced by a high-stakes adrenaline spike. This is why having an external support system, whether it's law enforcement, a therapist, or family, is so critical, as the victim's own internal resources have been so systematically depleted by the previous phases. I want to stop here for a moment, and I want to talk to you and be really real for you. If you're in a situation where you're starting to see the real person behind the mask, understand that your intuition is your best defense. The moment that you stop playing the role that they've assigned to you is the moment their behavior may escalate. This is the bursting of the bubble, and it requires a strategic, supported exit. In the final part of this clinical file, I'm going to show you how to spot these warning signs before the bubble bursts, so you can reclaim your life safely. It's so important to realize that the stories of Sheree Spencer and John Meehan aren't just sensational headlines or true crime fodder, if you will. From my perspective as a therapist, these are clinical case studies in the survival of a human spirit against domestic siege. These cases provide us with a rare, transparent look at the mechanics of coercive control. It proves that the predator's most effective weapon isn't their fist, it's their ability to dismantle your reality. If there's one specific red flag that both cases shared, and one that I want to burn into your memory, is the accelerated timeline. Sheree Spencer and John Meehan both pushed their relationships to a level of intensity and commitment far faster than what's healthy. Why? Because the sooner they can secure the bond, the sooner they can begin the isolation. If a relationship feels like a whirlwind, where you are being swept off your feet before you have even seen their ID or met their long-term friends, your internal alarm bells should be deafening and raging and going off. Danger, danger, danger. To help you navigate your own world, I want to summarize the 3 universal red flags that we've uncovered in this clinical file. The first one is the too good to be true professional aurora. Be cautious of anyone who uses their status, or real or fabricated, as a shield to deflect questions or to make you feel less than. The second one is the rapid pace that I just mentioned. Healthy trust is built in drops, not in buckets. If they're demanding total commitment or an us against the world loyalty in the first few months, take a step back. The third one is the subtle isolation. It starts small, a comment about a friend, a critique about a family member, or suggesting you handle finances differently. This is the first brick in the invisible fence that we talked about. And if you're watching this and you feel a sinking sensation in your stomach because these patterns look familiar, please listen to me very carefully. You're not alone, and this is not your fault. The freeze response and the cortisol cloud are biological reactions to an impossible situation. You haven't lost your strength. It's just being used to survive. Help is available, and there are professionals who understand the nuance of high-status abuse. Have you ever ignored your intuition because someone's professional status made you doubt your own eyes?